The young man woke up early that morning feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. Today was important. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks. A job at a well-known hotel, one of the most respected places in the city, was finally within his reach. He had polished his shoes, ironed his shirt, and carefully combed his hair. Every detail mattered because he wanted to make a good impression, not just for the job but for himself. He knew he had the skills and the drive to succeed. All that was left was to show it. As he stepped out of his apartment, the cool morning air greeted him. The streets were just beginning to wake up, with shopkeepers opening their doors and delivery trucks moving along the quiet roads. He walked with confidence, though a part of him kept wondering what would happen once he entered the hotel. He had faced challenges before, but this was different. The hotel was a place where appearances and first impressions carried immense weight, and he knew that sometimes people could judge too quickly. When he reached the hotel, he paused for a moment to take it all in. The building was impressive, with a tall glass facade that reflected the sunlight. The lobby was grand, with marble floors and elegant chandeliers that sparkled above. Guests in fine clothes moved past him, some talking on their phones, others hurrying to meetings or leisure activities. It all looked welcoming and polished, but he could not shake the nervous feeling building inside him. He walked to the front desk, smiling politely at the receptionist. "I'm here for an interview," he said. The receptionist checked her screen and gave a nod. "Please have a seat. The supervisor will be with you shortly." He thanked her and sat down, trying to calm his racing heart. He observed the other candidates, some already talking with the supervisor, others waiting like him. Everyone seemed confident, chatting casually or reviewing notes. Then the supervisor appeared. She was a woman in her late 40s, dressed in a crisp suit that matched the hotel's reputation. She carried herself with authority, and her sharp eyes scanned the lobby quickly before settling on him. The moment she saw him, her expression changed slightly, though she tried to mask it. There was a subtle tension in the air, one that the young man noticed immediately. She approached him, clipboard in hand, and greeted him formally. But there was a hint of something different in her tone, something dismissive, almost questioning. "Are you sure you're here for an interview?" she asked, her voice polite but with an edge. The young man blinked, momentarily surprised. He smiled and replied, "Yes, ma'am. I'm scheduled for 10 o'clock with you." She gave a small nod, but there was a noticeable pause before she continued. She asked him a few questions about why he wanted the job and what he knew about the hotel. Her questions seemed normal at first, but he noticed that she kept interrupting him, cutting him off mid-sentence, as if she was trying to test his patience or catch him off guard. While other candidates were treated with warmth and encouragement, she seemed determined to make him uncomfortable. She asked about his experience in ways that seemed irrelevant, pressing him on details that did not matter. When he answered confidently and politely, she raised her eyebrows as if unconvinced. The young man tried to stay composed, reminding himself that professionalism was key. He had faced judgment before and knew how to maintain his dignity no matter the circumstances. Time passed slowly, each question feeling heavier than the last. Other staff members glanced at him with curiosity, whispering quietly among themselves. He could sense their concern. Some gave small supportive smiles, but none intervened. He realized that this was a delicate situation, one that required patience and tact. He kept his answers clear and steady, hoping that his qualifications and calm demeanor would eventually speak louder than her prejudice. The supervisor finally leaned back slightly in her chair, as if to signal that the interview might be ending. Though it was clear she had already made up her mind about him, she scribbled a few notes on her clipboard and asked, "Do you have any questions for me?" He nodded politely and asked about the team he would be working with and the opportunities for growth within the hotel. Her answers were curt, almost dismissive, but he listened carefully, showing genuine interest. He wanted to prove that he was capable no matter how she treated him. After a few more moments, she stood up, signaling the end of the interview. "Thank you for coming in," she said, her tone neutral. "We will let you know our decision." The young man thanked her, standing straight and extending his hand. She shook it briefly but did not meet his eyes. As he walked out of the room, he felt a mix of relief and disappointment. He knew he had done his best, but he also knew that her attitude had been unfair. He waited quietly in the lobby for a few minutes, gathering his thoughts before leaving. While he had hoped for a positive experience, he realized that not everyone judged people fairly. He reminded himself that this one encounter did not define his abilities or his worth. He had worked hard to reach this point, and he was determined to keep pushing forward, no matter what challenges came his way. Just as he was about to step outside, the doors opened again. A woman entered, walking with a confidence that immediately drew attention. She was well-dressed, composed, and carried an air of authority. Guests and staff alike noticed her presence, pausing to acknowledge her quietly. She looked around briefly, her eyes finally landing on the young man. "Hello," she said warmly, approaching him. "I'm here to see how my son's interview went." The young man turned slightly, surprised but composed, and introduced her politely. The supervisor, who had been walking past, froze for a moment. Her face paled slightly as she realized who the woman was. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The room, which had felt tense before, became charged with anticipation. Everyone could sense that the balance of power had changed in a single moment. The mother's presence was commanding yet gentle. She observed the interaction between the supervisor and her son carefully, noting the subtle signs of discomfort and unease. She asked a few calm questions about how the interview had gone, listening closely to the young man's responses. He spoke honestly, recounting the experience respectfully but clearly, mentioning how he had been treated differently from other candidates. The supervisor shifted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence wavering as the truth of the situation became evident. Other staff members watched silently, some exchanging looks of disbelief. It was unusual to see someone intervene so directly, especially with such authority. The young man remained composed, proud, but nervous. He knew that his mother's presence could make a difference, but he also understood that it would be important to stay professional and let her handle the situation. The mother's voice was calm but firm as she addressed the supervisor. She asked about her approach, pointing out that everyone deserved to be treated fairly without prejudice. The supervisor tried to respond, but her words came out hesitant and unconvincing. It was clear that she had been caught off guard. The young man's mother did not raise her voice or display anger, yet her authority was undeniable. Moments passed that felt like hours. The tension in the room was palpable. Staff members watched quietly, realizing that the situation was about to reach a turning point. The young man remained by his mother's side, observing carefully but staying silent, knowing that this was not the moment for him to speak. He trusted her to handle the situation with the decisiveness and fairness she was known for. By the end of their conversation, the supervisor understood that her actions had been noticed and would not be tolerated. She tried to regain control, but the mother's presence left no room for excuses. The young man felt a mixture of relief and pride. Relief that someone powerful had recognized the unfairness, and pride in himself for maintaining dignity and professionalism despite the treatment he had received. As the mother turned to leave, she gave a small smile to her son, silently reassuring him that he had done everything right. The young man felt a renewed sense of confidence. He realized that while life might present unfair challenges, the combination of patience, integrity, and support could turn even the most difficult situations around. He walked out of the hotel with his head held high, ready for whatever came next, knowing that he had faced injustice with courage and that justice, in its own way, had arrived. The lobby slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the story of what had just happened lingered in the minds of the staff and guests. The young man's experience, though difficult, had shown the importance of staying calm, standing tall, and letting the truth reveal itself. It was a lesson in fairness, resilience, and the power of support, one that would stay with him as he moved forward, confident that his abilities and character were stronger than any prejudice he might face. After the interview, the young man left the hotel with a heavy feeling in his chest. He had tried to stay calm and professional, but the supervisor's dismissive behavior had left a mark. Every step he took on the sidewalk outside felt like a reminder that prejudice could appear even in places that seemed polished and welcoming. He tried to shake it off, reminding himself that he had done everything correctly. He had answered every question confidently, shown genuine interest, and treated everyone with respect. That should count for something. But as he walked back to the train station, he could not stop thinking about the way the supervisor had looked at him, the slight pause in her voice, the questioning glance that seemed to say he did not belong. It stung, even though he knew deep down that her opinion did not define him. He had grown up learning to face challenges with determination, and this was just another test of his patience and resilience. He told himself that the right people would see his value, and that he could not control others' biases, only his response to them. The next morning, he returned to the hotel for the second part of the application process. This time, it involved meeting the head of the department he hoped to join. He felt a mix of hope and nervousness. Maybe this time things would go differently. He wanted to focus on the opportunities ahead, rather than dwell on yesterday's experience. He reminded himself that he had talent, drive, and the ability to learn quickly. That was more important than any judgment from one person. As he entered the hotel lobby, he noticed the same supervisor watching him from across the room. Her eyes followed him closely, and he felt the tension rising immediately. The staff around him sensed it too, whispering quietly to each other. He smiled politely at the receptionist, who returned the gesture, trying to make him feel welcome. He took a deep breath and approached the waiting area for his meeting. He wanted to show calmness and professionalism, even though inside his heart raced. When the supervisor approached him, she asked him more pointed questions this time. Her tone was slightly sharper, and she seemed to be testing his patience deliberately. "Do you really think you are ready for this position?" she asked. The young man looked her in the eye calmly and replied, "Yes, ma'am. I have prepared for this role, and I am confident in my abilities. I am ready to learn and contribute to your team." Her expression tightened. She scribbled on her clipboard as if his answer was unsatisfactory. Other staff members watched quietly, sensing that the situation was becoming more tense. He noticed a few colleagues exchanging glances, their faces showing quiet concern. Some had seen how he had been treated yesterday, and they seemed to understand the unfairness of the situation. Despite the discomfort, he did not falter. He kept his posture straight, his voice steady, and his mind focused on the conversation, not the prejudice. The supervisor continued her questioning, but now it became more personal. She asked about his family background, where he had grown up, and what connections he had. It was clear these questions were irrelevant to the job, and he recognized them as subtle attempts to intimidate or undermine him. He answered respectfully, keeping the focus on his skills and experience. "I believe my background has taught me discipline and resilience," he said. "These qualities make me well prepared for this role." Her tone shifted slightly, almost impatient, as she asked more pointed questions about his past work experience. The young man explained clearly how he had handled customer service situations, teamwork, and problem-solving in previous roles. He gave examples, sharing small stories of challenges he had faced and how he had overcome them. The supervisor listened but seemed unwilling to acknowledge his competence. She nodded occasionally, but her eyes were hard and judging. Meanwhile, other employees continued to notice the unfair treatment. One staff member, a young woman at the front desk, whispered quietly to a colleague, "He's so professional. Why is she treating him like this?" Her colleague nodded silently, both understanding the tension and wishing there was a way to intervene without causing more conflict. The young man remained unaware of these conversations, fully focused on staying composed and confident. As the interview progressed, the supervisor made subtle comments that revealed her bias. "You know, this is a very competitive environment," she said. "It's not just about skills. It's about fitting in here." Her words carried an undertone that implied he might not belong because of who he was. The young man felt a brief sting but kept his composure. He responded calmly, "I respect the standards of this hotel and am ready to contribute fully. I am confident that my abilities will allow me to succeed here." The supervisor seemed frustrated by his confidence. She scribbled more notes on her clipboard, glancing at him in a way that suggested disbelief. It was clear that she had already made a judgment before he even spoke. The young man noticed her expression but refused to let it shake him. He had learned early in life that people's assumptions often revealed more about them than about him. He focused on what he could control, his professionalism, his answers, and his calm demeanor. Time passed slowly. The young man answered question after question, always politely, always thoughtfully. He could feel the weight of the supervisor's scrutiny, but chose to treat it as a challenge rather than an attack. Every time she interrupted him, he paused, took a breath, and responded calmly. His patience and steady tone began to catch the attention of others in the room. Some staff members started nodding subtly, as if silently supporting his composure. Finally, the meeting ended, and the supervisor stood up, signaling that the interview was complete. She gave him a polite but cold handshake. "We will let you know about the decision," she said. The young man thanked her and stepped back, his heart still pounding. He had handled the situation with grace, but he knew that her bias could still influence the outcome. He tried not to dwell on it, reminding himself that sometimes the truth finds a way to surface in unexpected ways. As he walked to the lobby, he noticed the presence of his mother. She had arrived quietly, as she often did, without making a scene. Her presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. Staff members noticed her and paused, sensing the authority and influence she carried. She approached him and asked softly, "How did it go?" He smiled faintly and explained briefly what had happened, recounting the questions and the subtle dismissiveness he had faced. She listened carefully, nodding as she absorbed the details. Without saying much, she asked him to wait a moment while she spoke with the supervisor. The young man watched quietly as his mother approached the woman. Her calm and confident demeanor commanded attention, and it was clear that she expected honesty. Staff members stood silently, curious about the interaction. The supervisor seemed slightly uneasy, unsure how to respond to someone who carried such presence and authority. His mother spoke directly and calmly, asking the supervisor about the questions she had asked and the way she had treated her son. The supervisor hesitated, trying to justify her behavior, but her words sounded weak and unconvincing. The young man could sense that the truth was becoming clear. His mother's voice did not rise, and she did not need to raise it. The authority in her tone alone was enough to make the supervisor uneasy. The staff around them watched silently, understanding that the moment was pivotal. The young man stood with pride, realizing that he had maintained his composure despite the challenges. He knew that patience, respect, and calmness could make a difference when facing unfair treatment. His mother's intervention was decisive yet graceful, demonstrating that integrity and fairness always carried weight. After several minutes, the conversation ended. The supervisor looked visibly shaken and unsure how to continue. His mother nodded to her son, silently conveying reassurance and pride. The young man felt a wave of relief and gratitude. The experience had been difficult, but it had also shown him that standing tall and staying professional, even under pressure, could lead to justice. As they walked toward the exit, he reflected on the events. He realized that prejudice could appear anywhere, even in spaces that seemed welcoming. Yet he also understood that integrity, composure, and support from those who cared could create powerful outcomes. The encounter had been a test, and he had faced it with strength. He felt more confident than ever in his ability to navigate challenges and prove his worth, no matter the obstacles. That day, the young man learned something important. True professionalism was not just about answering questions correctly or having the right skills. It was about maintaining dignity, showing resilience in the face of bias, and trusting that the truth would ultimately be recognized. His mother's presence had amplified this lesson, demonstrating that support, advocacy, and courage could make a real difference. The hotel lobby returned to its usual rhythm, but the impression of what had happened lingered. Staff members whispered quietly, some reflecting on their own experiences with bias, others silently admiring the young man's calmness. The supervisor, though still trying to maintain composure, understood that her actions had consequences. The young man walked away with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue pursuing his dreams, knowing that he had faced injustice and come through with dignity. The experience became a quiet story among staff, a reminder that professionalism, fairness, and courage always mattered. It was a lesson that would stay with him as he moved forward, guiding his actions and strengthening his confidence. He knew that challenges would continue to appear, but he also knew that he had the tools to navigate them. The day's events, though difficult, had shown him that resilience, patience, and truth could prevail, and that even in the face of bias, there was always a path toward respect and recognition. The young man had been waiting quietly in the hotel lobby, trying to focus on his own thoughts when his mother arrived. She walked in with a calm but undeniable presence that immediately drew attention. People in the lobby paused, some glanced in her direction, and a few staff members whispered softly to one another. She had that kind of presence that did not need to raise a voice to be noticed. The way she carried herself made it clear that she commanded respect. The young man felt a mix of relief and nervousness. He knew she had come to support him, But he also understood that the situation was about to become intense. As she approached him, she gave a gentle smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly. The young man replied honestly, describing the awkwardness and the subtle ways the supervisor had treated him differently from other candidates. He spoke with calm clarity, recounting her questions, the interruptions, and the dismissive tone. His mother listened carefully, nodding occasionally, her eyes focused and observant. She did not interrupt. She wanted to understand exactly what had happened before taking any action. Once he finished, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for telling me exactly what happened," she said softly. "Let me handle the rest." The young man felt a sense of relief wash over him. He knew his mother was a strong and influential person, someone who did not tolerate injustice. He trusted that she would act wisely, firmly, and professionally, and that her intervention could make a difference. The supervisor, who had been standing nearby, noticed the woman and froze. Her eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned. There was a brief pause in the lobby, a silence heavy with anticipation. The staff around them felt the tension, realizing that something important was about to unfold. The young man's mother walked calmly toward the supervisor, her demeanor confident and composed, radiating authority without aggression. "Good morning," she said politely but firmly. "I would like to discuss my son's interview." The supervisor shifted uncomfortably, realizing she was about to face scrutiny from someone far more powerful than herself. She tried to maintain a neutral expression, but her slight fidgeting betrayed her unease. The other staff members watched silently, sensing that this conversation would reveal the truth about how the young man had been treated. His mother began by asking simple questions about the interview process. "How did the interview go?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. The supervisor hesitated, then gave a vague response, avoiding direct answers. She tried to justify her actions by saying she was following standard procedures, but the explanation sounded rehearsed and hollow. The young man's mother listened carefully, her expression unchanged, showing patience but also a quiet determination that left no room for evasion. She asked specific questions about how the young man had been treated compared to other candidates. "Were all candidates asked the same questions?" she inquired. The supervisor shifted in place, her voice faltering slightly. She stammered through her answer, and it became clear that the treatment had not been equal. The mother's eyes narrowed subtly, not with anger but with focus as she analyzed the situation. She wanted the truth, and it was unfolding before her. The young man watched silently, feeling a mixture of pride and tension, pride that his mother had stepped in to support him, and tension because he knew the situation could escalate. The supervisor attempted to regain control, trying to explain her behavior as routine or necessary, but the mother's calm authority made excuses sound weak. She asked questions that revealed inconsistencies, and each attempt by the supervisor to defend herself only highlighted the unfair treatment. Other staff members observed quietly, some nodding subtly as they recognized the injustice. They could see that the young man had been professional and composed, despite the supervisor's behavior. They could also see that the mother was handling the situation with tact and authority, making it clear that bias and unfair treatment would not be tolerated in her presence. The atmosphere in the lobby was tense yet orderly, as everyone waited to see how the situation would resolve. The mother's words were measured, deliberate, and precise. "Everyone deserves to be treated fairly regardless of their appearance or background," she said. "This hotel has a reputation to uphold, and that includes respecting all candidates and staff members equally. My son was professional and well-prepared, yet he was treated differently." "Can you explain why?" The supervisor's voice faltered. She tried to respond but could not provide a convincing answer. Her attempts to justify her actions sounded defensive and unsatisfactory, revealing that she had indeed acted unfairly. The young man felt a sense of relief. He had remained composed, and now the truth was clear for everyone to see. His mother's presence had brought accountability, showing that discrimination and bias could not go unnoticed. She continued to speak, her tone firm but calm, pointing out the potential consequences of unfair treatment, not just for the individual, but for the hotel's reputation and team morale. Her words carried weight, and the staff members listened intently, realizing the seriousness of the situation. The supervisor tried once more to defend herself, but her excuses seemed weak against the clear observations of the mother. The young man could see that she was beginning to understand that her actions had been inappropriate. He had remained professional throughout, answering questions respectfully and calmly, and now it was evident that the problem lay with the supervisor's behavior, not his own. The mother's approach was deliberate. She did not yell, she did not insult, but she made her point unmistakably clear. Bias, favoritism, and unfair treatment would not be tolerated. She emphasized that respect, fairness, and integrity were essential in every workplace, and that everyone, including the supervisor, needed to be accountable for their actions. Her words left little room for argument, and the supervisor's posture and expression reflected that realization. Other staff members began to murmur quietly among themselves, sharing their observations and thoughts. Some expressed relief that the situation was being addressed, while others reflected on their own experiences with bias in the workplace. The young man remained silent, observing calmly, understanding that his mother was taking the lead and that he needed to let her handle the confrontation. After several minutes of discussion, the supervisor finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. She appeared visibly shaken, realizing that her behavior had been noticed and judged by someone with authority and influence. The mother's calm and confident presence had revealed the truth without aggression, and the supervisor's attempts at defense had only highlighted her bias. The mother turned to her son, giving him a small, reassuring smile. It was a silent message, a reminder that he had handled the situation with integrity and professionalism. He felt a wave of pride and relief. The confrontation, though tense, had shown that patience, composure, and truth could prevail over unfair treatment. He had stood tall, and now justice was beginning to take shape. The staff members began to relax slightly, sensing that the confrontation had reached its turning point. The supervisor, though still uncomfortable, realized that her actions could not be ignored. The young man had remained professional throughout, and now the mother's presence had ensured that accountability would follow. It was a powerful lesson in fairness, respect, and the importance of addressing bias directly. Finally, the mother addressed the supervisor one last time. "It is important that everyone here is treated with respect and fairness," she said. "I trust that you understand the seriousness of this situation and that steps will be taken to prevent this from happening again." The supervisor nodded, her face pale and her voice quiet. She understood that her behavior had consequences and that her actions had been inappropriate. The young man felt a sense of closure. He had faced discrimination, remained composed, and now witnessed accountability in action. The experience had been difficult, but it had also shown him the power of patience, professionalism, and the support of someone who cared. He realized that challenges would continue to appear in life, but handling them with integrity and calmness could lead to justice. As he walked with his mother toward the exit, he reflected on what had happened. The lobby returned to its normal rhythm, but the lessons of the day lingered. He understood that bias and prejudice could appear anywhere, but he also saw that truth, fairness, and integrity could prevail when faced with courage and calm determination. He felt stronger, more confident, and ready to continue pursuing his dreams without fear of judgment. The story of the confrontation quietly spread among staff members, not as gossip, but as a reminder of professionalism, respect, and accountability. They had witnessed how composure, integrity, and truth could expose bias and lead to change. The young man had handled himself with grace, and the mother's intervention had ensured that justice was served. It was a moment that would remain in the minds of those present, a lesson in courage and fairness that went beyond the immediate situation. The young man knew that this was just the beginning of his journey. Challenges would arise, but he had learned that maintaining dignity, being patient, and trusting in fairness could overcome even the most uncomfortable situations. His mother's presence had reinforced this lesson, showing that support, advocacy, and wisdom could create change when needed. He felt ready to face the future, confident in his abilities and in the principle that fairness and respect should always guide actions. The day's events left a lasting impression. The supervisor had been confronted with the truth, the young man had proven his professionalism, and the staff had witnessed the importance of fairness in the workplace. It was a story of resilience, accountability, and integrity, one that would continue to inspire and remind everyone involved that bias, no matter how subtle, could not stand when faced with truth and courage. The young man walked out of the hotel with his mother, feeling lighter and more assured than ever. He knew that he had faced discrimination, but he had done so with patience and professionalism. He had learned that even in difficult situations, maintaining dignity and composure could lead to justice. The experience had strengthened his confidence, and he felt ready to begin his journey in the hotel industry, knowing that his character, skill, and perseverance were stronger than any prejudice he might encounter. The lobby of the hotel was quiet now, but the tension from earlier still lingered in the air. The young man stood near his mother, feeling a mixture of pride, nervousness, and relief. He had faced discrimination, remained composed, and now, with his mother's presence, the situation was reaching a turning point. The supervisor, who had tried to maintain authority before, was now visibly unsettled. Her confidence had waned, and the staff could see that she was realizing the seriousness of her actions. The mother, calm and steady, turned her attention fully to the supervisor. She spoke with a firm, even tone, emphasizing the seriousness of the matter. "It is not acceptable to treat anyone unfairly based on how they look or where they come from," she said. Her words carried weight, echoing in the minds of everyone in the lobby. The supervisor tried to respond, but her voice faltered. She stumbled over her words, attempting to justify her behavior, but the explanation sounded weak and unconvincing. The young man watched quietly, feeling a sense of validation. He had kept his composure through every unfair question, every dismissive look, and every subtle insult. And now it was clear that the fault lay with the supervisor, not him. He had learned that sometimes justice did not come immediately, but when it did, it was important to remain calm and professional. Today was proving that patience and integrity could make a difference. The mother continued, speaking with precision and authority. "My son came here prepared, professional, and respectful. Yet he was treated differently than other candidates. That is not fair. It is not right. And it reflects poorly on this hotel if such behavior is allowed to continue." Her eyes met the supervisor's, calm but unwavering. The supervisor shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her gaze. The room was silent except for the sound of her nervous shifting and the subtle murmurs of staff who were watching everything unfold. The staff around them were starting to understand the gravity of the situation. Some exchanged looks, nodding slightly as if to acknowledge that the young man had been treated unfairly. Others whispered quietly to one another, reflecting on their own experiences and thinking about what they had just witnessed. It was clear that this confrontation was not just about one interview or one supervisor. It was about respect, fairness, and the responsibility of everyone in the workplace to act ethically. The mother took a deep breath and continued, making her point with quiet authority. "Bias and discrimination have no place here. Anyone in a position of responsibility must treat every candidate and employee with respect, fairness, and dignity. My son has the right to be judged by his skills and character, not by assumptions or prejudice. You must understand that such actions are unacceptable." The supervisor looked increasingly uncomfortable. She tried once again to defend her behavior, saying that she had followed protocol or that she had been careful, but it was clear that her words were not convincing. The mother's calm, precise, and confident approach left no room for excuses. The staff watching could see that the supervisor was cornered, unable to continue justifying her actions without sounding dishonest or weak. The young man felt a mix of emotions. He was relieved that the unfair treatment was being addressed, proud that he had remained composed throughout the ordeal, and cautiously optimistic that justice would finally be served. He realized that having integrity and patience had allowed him to face discrimination without losing control, and now he was witnessing accountability in action. The mother addressed the supervisor one final time. "I trust that you understand the seriousness of this situation," she said. "There must be consequences for your actions. This is not just about my son. It is about setting an example for everyone in this hotel. Respect and fairness must be upheld at all times." Her words were calm but firm, leaving no room for doubt. The supervisor nodded reluctantly, realizing that her actions had led to a moment she could not undo. At that moment, the hotel manager arrived, having been informed of the situation. He had observed from a distance and now approached, listening carefully to what had happened. The mother explained calmly what had occurred during the interviews, detailing how her son had been treated unfairly and how the supervisor's behavior had been inappropriate. The manager, A professional who valued reputation and integrity, quickly understood the seriousness of the issue. The staff around them continued to watch, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The young man remained composed, standing beside his mother and silently observing. He knew that the next steps were crucial, and that the supervisor's accountability would be determined by the decisions of the hotel management. He felt a mix of relief and anticipation as he waited for the outcome. The manager addressed the supervisor directly. "It is clear that your behavior was not acceptable," he said. "We have a responsibility to maintain fairness and professionalism at all times. There are consequences for actions that violate these principles." The supervisor remained silent, realizing that her position was now at risk. Her face reflected a mixture of regret, fear, and understanding. The mother nodded slightly, acknowledging the manager's response. She remained composed, letting the professionalism of the situation guide her actions. The young man felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had stayed professional, handled the bias with patience, and now, through his mother's intervention and the manager's understanding, justice was being served. The supervisor was asked to step aside for a private conversation with the management team. The young man observed silently, understanding that this was a necessary step. The staff whispered quietly among themselves, discussing what they had just witnessed. Some expressed surprise at the swift action. Others shared relief that fairness had been prioritized. The young man realized that the events of the day had left a lasting impression on everyone present. After a brief period, the manager returned to speak with the young man and his mother. "We appreciate the professionalism and patience you have shown," he said. "It is clear that you were treated unfairly, and steps are being taken to ensure that this does not happen again. You will have the opportunity to join the team, and the supervisor in question will be held accountable." The young man felt a mixture of relief and pride. He had faced discrimination, remained composed, and now he was being recognized for his professionalism. He realized that life sometimes presented challenges that were beyond one's control, but handling them with integrity could lead to positive outcomes. His mother gave him a reassuring smile, silently communicating pride and support. The supervisor, meanwhile, was formally relieved of her duties. The staff had witnessed the consequences of unfair treatment firsthand. It became clear that accountability was essential for maintaining respect and fairness in the workplace. The young man observed silently, understanding that the events of the day had not only impacted him, but had also served as a lesson for the entire team. The mother stayed by his side as he received the formal offer for the position. He was filled with gratitude and excitement. The challenges he had faced during the interview process had tested his patience, composure, and professionalism. He had learned that bias and unfair treatment could appear even in places that seemed welcoming. But standing firm with integrity could lead to justice. The staff continued to whisper quietly, reflecting on what they had witnessed. Some were inspired by the young man's composure and professionalism, others by the mother's calm and authoritative intervention. The events of the day left a lasting impression, reinforcing the importance of fairness, respect, and accountability. The young man walked through the hotel lobby with his mother, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. He realized that life would continue to present challenges, but he now had an even stronger understanding of how to face them with dignity and professionalism. He had learned that maintaining calm and integrity in difficult situations could lead to justice, recognition, and personal growth. The story of what had happened quietly spread among staff, not as gossip but as a reminder of the importance of fairness and respect. The young man's experience became a lesson in professionalism, patience, and resilience. He had faced discrimination,